Vienna, Austria. March 1978. A bookseller arranges first editions in his shop window on Rentnerstrasse, humming along to a radio broadcast. Customers browse philosophy texts and rare manuscripts, unaware that beneath their feet, in a cellar accessible only through a hidden panel behind the biography section, sits a radio transmitter powerful enough to reach Moscow. The bookseller isn't who he claims to be. His name isn't Werner Hoffman. He's Colonel Yuri Andropov of the KGB. And for 6 years he's been running one of Soviet intelligence's most productive networks in Western Europe. Today is the last day he'll transmit anything to anyone, because 2 intelligence services that normally compete for territory and credit have done something remarkable. They've decided to work together. Before we dive in, hit subscribe to Mossad Classified. This channel uncovers secret missions, intelligence tactics, and covert history they never meant for the public to see. The strangest part about this story isn't that the KGB built a spy network in neutral Austria. That's expected. Cold War espionage turned Vienna into a battlefield where East met West, where diplomats smiled over coffee while their intelligence officers traded secrets in back alleys. The strange part is what brought Mossad and the CIA together in the first place. These weren't natural allies. They competed constantly, hoarded intelligence, and viewed each other with the kind of suspicion that professionals reserve for people who do exactly what they do. But in early 1977, something happened that made cooperation not just possible, but necessary. A defector walked into the American embassy in Athens carrying proof that the KGB had penetrated both services simultaneously, recruiting assets who reported on Mossad operations to Moscow and CIA operations to the same handlers. The spy network wasn't targeting one enemy. It was targeting both, playing them against each other, while feeding Soviet intelligence a comprehensive picture of Western activities across the Middle East and Europe. The defector's name was Dmitry Volkov, though that probably wasn't real either. Intelligence officers live in a world where names are currency, spent and discarded based on operational need. What mattered wasn't who Volkov had been, but what he carried. A microfiche containing the true identities of 17 KGB assets operating under deep cover across 6 countries. 3 of them worked for organizations with direct access to Israeli intelligence. 2 had connections to CIA operations in Europe. The rest formed a support network that provided logistics, communications, and cover for the primary agents. Volkov claimed he was defecting on principle, that he'd grown disgusted with Soviet methods and wanted to help the West. Intelligence officers never believe such claims. Defectors have motives that rarely involve principle. Money, revenge, sexual compromise, fear of discovery, these are the currencies that buy betrayal. Volkov's motivation remained unclear, but his information checked out. The identities he provided matched known intelligence gaps, unexplained leaks, and operations that had failed for reasons never quite understood. The CIA station chief in Athens was a man named Thomas Carrington, a career officer who'd spent 2 decades in European postings and understood the delicate politics of intelligence sharing. He read Volkov's material and immediately recognized the implications. If the information was accurate, the KGB had accomplished something extraordinary. They'd built a network that could monitor both Israeli and American operations simultaneously, allowing Moscow to understand not just what each service was doing, but how they interacted, where they cooperated, and where they competed. This level of penetration represented a strategic intelligence coup that would take years to repair if the network remained operational. Carrington sent an encrypted cable to Langley recommending immediate coordination with Mossad. The recommendation was unusual enough that it triggered a secure conference call between CIA leadership and the Director of Central Intelligence. Some argued against sharing. Israeli intelligence had a reputation for aggressive operations that sometimes embarrassed American partners. Mossad didn't always ask permission before conducting operations on Allied soil, and they rarely apologized when caught. But the counter-argument was stronger. The network targeted both services. Dismantling it required coordinated action. If CIA moved alone, they'd expose the Israeli penetrations without neutralizing them, alerting Moscow that the network was compromised and forcing the KGB to shut down operations before Mossad could act. The decision came down from the top. Share everything with Tel Aviv, work together, crush the network completely. Mossad's response arrived within 48 hours. They'd suspected penetration but lacked proof. Volkov's information confirmed operational failures they'd attributed to bad luck or tactical mistakes. A source in Damascus who'd stopped reporting. An operation in Beirut that the PLO seemed to know about in advance. Technical surveillance that never quite worked as planned. Now they understood. Someone had been feeding their secrets to Moscow, and Moscow had been sharing selectively with enemies who used the information to counter Israeli operations. The coordination began with a meeting in Brussels at a safe house maintained by neither service, but accessible to both. 3 CIA officers and 2 Mossad operatives sat across a table covered with files photographs. And the kind of strong coffee that intelligence officers consume in quantities that would hospitalize normal humans. They worked through Volkov's material methodically, cross-referencing names against known contacts, tracking financial flows, and building a comprehensive picture of how the network operated. What emerged was elegantly simple and devastatingly effective. The KGB had recruited a Viennese bookseller named Werner Hoffmann in 1972 during a cultural exchange visit to Moscow. Hoffmann was an actual bookseller, which made his cover unassailable. He traveled frequently to acquire rare books, maintained correspondence with dealers across Europe, and handled enough cash transactions that unusual financial activity would be difficult to detect. But Hoffmann was also ideologically committed. He'd been a communist sympathizer since university, believed in Soviet socialism, and saw his recruitment as an opportunity to serve the cause he'd supported intellectually for decades. This combination of authentic cover and genuine commitment made him the perfect agent. He wasn't pretending to be a bookseller. He was one. The espionage was the secret life hidden beneath real commercial activity. Hoffmann's bookstore became the network's hub. Agents from across Europe visited under pretext of buying rare editions or selling collections. These visits allowed face-to-face meetings without the surveillance risk of embassy contacts or dead drops that counterintelligence might monitor. The bookstore's cellar contained the radio equipment for emergency communications with Moscow. Financial transactions flowed through the shop's legitimate accounts, disguised as book purchases that justified large cash movements. And Hoffmann himself served as Kutut, receiving information from primary agents and transmitting consolidated reports to KGB handlers who never directly contacted the sources. This compartmentalization protected the network. If Hoffmann was compromised, he could expose only the agents he personally handled. The broader structure would survive. The primary agents were professionals who'd been cultivated over years through patient intelligence work. One worked as a translator for an international organization that frequently handled Israeli diplomatic communications. Another was employed by a logistics company that serviced CIA operations in Eastern Europe. A third held a clerical position in an Austrian government ministry with access to security briefings shared with Western allies. None were in positions of obvious importance. They weren't generals or cabinet ministers. But they had access to information that, properly analyzed and combined, provided Moscow with comprehensive understanding of Western intelligence activities. Quick reminder, if you're still watching, you're exactly the type of person this channel is made for. Subscribe to Mossad Classified for deep intelligence breakdowns, psychological warfare analysis, and the hidden truths behind the world's most feared agency. The operational question became how to dismantle the network without alerting Moscow that the entire structure had been exposed. Intelligence services facing this situation have several options, each with distinct advantages and risks. They could arrest everyone simultaneously, destroying the network but revealing the extent of Western knowledge and potentially compromising Volkov as the source. They could monitor the network to understand its operations better, but that meant allowing continued intelligence leakage to Moscow. Or they could execute a surgical operation designed to appear like natural operational collapse rather than coordinated counterintelligence action. Mossad and CIA chose the surgical approach. The plan developed over weeks of coordination required careful timing, plausible cover stories, and acceptance that some aspects of the operation would remain publicly unexplained. The first target was the translator at the international organization. Rather than arresting her for espionage, Austrian security services quietly informed her employer that financial irregularities had been discovered in her expense reports. The accusation was manufactured, but supported by documentation that intelligence services had created specifically for this purpose. She was dismissed for misconduct rather than arrested for espionage. To outside observers, she'd lost her job over accounting fraud. To Moscow's handlers, the dismissal removed her access to valuable intelligence, but didn't suggest she'd been identified as a KGB asset. The logistics company employee presented a more complex problem. His position provided access to shipping manifests and transport schedules that revealed CIA supply chains supporting operations in Poland and Czechoslovakia. Removing him without explanation would alert Moscow that something was wrong. The solution required creating a business justification for his termination. American intelligence officers worked with the company's management to restructure the logistics division, eliminating several positions, including his on grounds of redundancy. The restructuring was real, affecting multiple employees who had no connection to intelligence work. Among them, almost unnoticed, was the KGB asset whose termination appeared to be unfortunate timing rather than targeted counterintelligence. The Austrian ministry clerk was handled differently. Mossad's technical services division placed him under intensive surveillance, documenting his meetings with Hoffman through photographs that showed the two men together in contexts that had no plausible innocent explanation. Austrian counterintelligence was quietly briefed and provided with evidence. They confronted the clerk privately, offering him a choice: resign immediately, citing health reasons, and face no prosecution, or remain in his position and be arrested publicly for espionage. He resigned the following week, disappearing into early retirement that raised no suspicions beyond his immediate colleagues wondering why someone so young would leave government service. But Werner Hoffman was the prize. Arresting him would expose the entire counterintelligence operation and alert Moscow that Volkov's defection had compromised their network. Yet leaving him operational meant he could continue serving as communications hub for any assets who'd escaped identification. The solution required making Hoffman useless to Moscow without making him suspicious that he'd been identified. The operation began with a fire. Not a dramatic blaze that would suggest arson, but a small electrical fire in the bookstore's cellar that damaged the radio transmitter beyond repair. The fire was real, started by a device that intelligence technicians had placed in the cellar's wiring during a break in weeks earlier. It appeared to be faulty wiring ignited by overload. Exactly the kind of accident that happens in old buildings with electrical systems that haven't been updated in decades. Hoffman couldn't simply purchase a new transmitter. The specialized equipment required for long-range encrypted communications wasn't available commercially, and requesting replacement through KGB channels risked exposure. He was forced to rely on alternative communication methods, dead drops and meetings with handlers that were slower and more vulnerable to surveillance. while he struggled to re-establish reliable communications. Mossad and CIA worked systematically through the remaining network members identified in Volkov's material. Each removal was calibrated to appear natural. A journalist with access to diplomatic sources was offered a prestigious position in South America that he couldn't refuse without raising questions about why he'd decline a career advancement. A travel agent who'd provided cover for intelligence operatives traveling under false documentation lost his business license over unrelated regulatory violations. A university professor with contacts in Israeli academic circles was denied tenure and quietly left the country. Within 6 months, every member of the network identified in Volkov's material had been neutralized without a single arrest or public accusation of espionage. To Moscow's intelligence analysts reviewing reports from Vienna, the network appeared to have collapsed through natural attrition and operational bad luck rather than coordinated counterintelligence. The psychological impact on KGB operations was severe. Intelligence services rely on confidence that their networks are secure and productive. When a successful network collapses without clear explanation, it creates paranoia. Had they been penetrated? Was Hoffman a double agent who'd betrayed everyone? Were there more failures Moscow didn't yet know about? This uncertainty paralyzed decision-making and made KGB officers in Vienna hesitant to recruit new assets or re-establish operations that might be walking into counterintelligence traps. Hoffman himself never understood what had happened. He watched his network disintegrate for reasons that seemed unrelated to intelligence work. People lost jobs, moved away, retired, died in accidents. Each individually was explainable. Collectively, the pattern was devastating. He continued operating his bookstore, maintaining his cover, waiting for Moscow to send new contacts or instructions that never came. Austrian authorities monitored him for another 3 years before losing interest. He died in 1985, still believing he'd been a loyal Soviet intelligence officer whose network had collapsed through misfortune rather than enemy action. The collaboration between Mossad and CIA on this operation proved valuable enough that both services established permanent liaison channels for sharing intelligence on Soviet operations. The precedent set in Vienna became a template for future cooperation, demonstrating that even competing intelligence services could work together when strategic interests aligned. The network's destruction removed a significant Soviet intelligence capability in Europe and demonstrated that Western counterintelligence could execute sophisticated operations that left more uncertain about what had actually happened. For Dmitry Volkov, the defector whose information made everything possible, life became quiet and anonymous. The CIA resettled him under a new identity in the American Midwest, far from the espionage world he'd inhabited. He received financial support, but not wealth, protection, but not prominence. He'd chosen betrayal over loyalty, and while American intelligence valued what he'd provided, they never quite trusted him. Defectors are never fully trusted because the qualities that make betrayal possible, moral flexibility, willingness to deceive, ability to maintain false identities, are the same qualities that make them potentially dangerous to their new masters. The Vienna operation remained classified for decades, known only to the officers directly involved and the senior leadership who'd authorized cooperation. No press accounts detailed the network's destruction. No book celebrated the intelligence coup. The success was measured not in headlines, but in the absence of Soviet intelligence operations that would have occurred if the network had remained functional. The attacks that weren't planned because Moscow lacked advance warning. The operations that succeeded because KGB couldn't brief Palestinian groups on Israeli movements. The security that came from knowing enemy intelligence capabilities had been degraded without them understanding how or why. Years later, when Soviet archives opened briefly after the Cold War's end, Russian historians discovered fragmentary KGB reports about the Vienna network's collapse. The assessments were contradictory and confused. Some analysts believed Hoffman had been compromised through operational mistakes. Others suspected he'd been a Western double agent from the beginning. A few recognized the possibility of a defector, but couldn't identify who might have betrayed the network. The reports revealed something more interesting than Moscow's confusion. They showed the strategic value of uncertainty in intelligence warfare. The KGB never understood what had destroyed their network, which meant they couldn't prevent similar operations from succeeding in the future. The human cost of the operation was carefully managed but real. The translator who lost her position struggled to find comparable work and eventually left Austria entirely. The logistics employee's career never recovered from the dismissal. The ministry clerk's early retirement left him financially insecure and socially isolated. None of them were prosecuted, which meant none of them could claim persecution or become martyrs for Soviet intelligence. But their lives were disrupted permanently by decisions made in conference rooms they'd never entered by officers whose names they'd never know. Mossad and CIA officers who'd worked the operation were themselves changed by the experience. They'd proven that cooperation could produce results neither service could achieve alone. But they'd also learned the limits of trust between intelligence organizations with fundamentally different priorities and methods. The relationship established in Vienna was professional rather than friendly, based on mutual benefit rather than shared values. It was exactly the kind of pragmatic partnership that defines intelligence work. Cold, calculating, effective. The tradecraft lessons from the Vienna operation influenced both services for decades. Mossad refined its techniques for neutralizing networks without triggering defensive responses from adversaries. CIA developed better protocols for sharing intelligence with foreign services while protecting sources and methods. Both organizations studied how the KGB had built such an effective network and implemented countermeasures to prevent similar penetrations of their own operations. The network structure, using commercial cover and ideologically motivated agents who genuinely believed in their cause, became a case study taught to counterintelligence officers in both services. If this story kept you watching, then don't just leave. Join the inner circle. Subscribe to Mossad Classified and turn future episodes into automatic intel drops. Here is the question that should keep you awake tonight. How many networks are operating right now, feeding your secrets to enemies who smile while they plot your destruction? And how many will collapse before you ever know they existed?